Super Mario Bros. 3 released in Japan in 1988 and became the greatest game on the NES and one of the greatest games of all time, as Super Mario Bros. 3 was Nintendo's magnum opus. Everything, especially all of their Mario games, had been leading up to the release of Super Mario Bros. 3. Before this, we had Super Mario Bros. 2 and 2, and for 2 out of these 3 games, they're just the same damn thing. One's just more harder than the other. So Nintendo needed something original, something brand new as opposed to what we had had before. They experimented with making Super Mario Bros. 3 a top-down style of platformer, you know, like Sonic 3D Blast. But after trying that out, they figured out the obvious. Having the game being top-down would have just made the jumps harder and harder, and with Mario being Jumpman, making jumps harder would have just been a complete terrible idea. The game took 2 years to complete, and brought back Shigeru Miyamoto as director, as opposed to 2, which didn't really have him working on it as he was busy with other games like Super Mario Bros. 2. The game was developed to both reinvent what Mario was and continue his journey from the original 2 games, so every single sprite from the original game was recreated in order to not carry over anything from the original game. Early in development, right after making Super Mario Bros. 1 in fact, Shigeru Miyamoto always thought that it would be a good idea for Mario to ride on some sort of animal, especially like a horse or something, so he drew up a concept and threw it on a wall. This idea would have Mario ride some sort of dinosaur-like creature, but according to the cutting room floor, the idea was shelved due to the limitations on the Famicom. There were also the introduction of the Koopalings. This was in an effort to create more and more enemies to the game and add diversity to the game. When the Koopalings were looked at by the developers of Nintendo of America, they decided to rename the Koopalings after musicians, like Ludwig von Koopa being named after Ludwig van Beethoven, just for a bit of fun. Speaking of musicians, Koji Kondo returned from the other Super Mario Bros. Games to create the soundtrack, who had a whole new philosophy while creating the music. With the original Super Mario Bros., he just focused on creating music based on a specific genre, whereas for this game, he looked at the levels in the game and wrote the music for those instead, making this game one of the hardest games he's ever had to compose for, according to himself. He also tried to explore different genres, which created the most iconic video game music of all time. Super Mario Bros. 3 was becoming one of the best games of all time, and as 1988 was underway, it was time to promote the game to make people interested. Hi, I'm Charlie, I'm back, and welcome back to 1988. I just came from the future using John's time machine, and we're using it to have a look at GTV July 1988, an early look at Super Mario Bros. 3. In Japan, the Famicom Tushin magazine, otherwise known as Famitsu, put out a VHS series known as Game TV. Their July 1988 VHS had a preview on Super Mario Bros. 3 while it was still being worked on. Let's put in the VHS and see what it has.
続いておりますが、ここで一息。野球ゲームの歴史を振り返ってみることにしましょう。
I don't know what just happened. Oh hell yeah! Baseball! Well, that was a little sudden. The VHS continues with more stuff about baseball and some sort of competition about baseball NES, which I can only describe as 2 wrestlers talking to a guy because he won a competition playing the worst version of baseball ever created for a video game console. But hey, at least there's Super Mario Bros. 3. This footage of Super Mario Bros. 3 shows an early version of 1.1, with a few differences compared to the final version, and an in-development version of 1.5. This isn't much of a look into the early development cycle of Super Mario Bros. 3, but hey, at least it's something. Look, I didn't explain it before, but the time travel actually takes the entire desk with me. So, the next preview of Super Mario Bros. 3 happens today! This early version of Super Mario Bros. 3 comes from Famimaga Video, otherwise known as the Family Computer Magazine. This video is straight up just a review of Super Mario Bros. 3, with once again ever so slight differences in the levels. It also just plays the wrong Mario theme. Some of the screenshots shown within this video are actually screenshots that were later used on the box art in the US, meaning some of the screenshots show levels that weren't actually in the game. Super Mario Bros. 3 releases today! Yes, Super Mario Bros. 3 came out in Japan in October of 1988 to complete praise. People loved the thing, which meant when they were bringing the game over to the rest of the world, all they saw was one of the most exciting games they had ever seen. Maybe Nintendo should make a feature-length movie promoting the American release of Super Mario Bros. 3. Wouldn't that be something? Remember The Wizard? Directed by Todd Holland for a release in 1989, Jimmy Woods suffers from PTSD after his twin sister, Jennifer, drowned 2 years earlier. Jimmy's family splits up, so he moves in with Mr. Bateman. No, not Patrick Bateman, that would be a different movie. He has 2 older half-brothers, Nick and Casey. Jimmy almost gets sent to an institution before his brother Casey breaks him out of his house. Then they go to LA, and then the parents try to find them, I guess. And they do that by going to a bounty hunter. What the hell is this movie, man? So then Jimmy and Casey go to Universal Studios Hollywood and find out that Jimmy is really good at video games. He plays Rad Racer with the Power Glove. My god, that's impressive. And they begin training on some arcade machines, which Power Glove doesn't really have anything to do with, so I don't understand the correlation with being good at Rad Racer with the Power Glove and being able to play on arcade machines, but hey, weirder things have happened. But when they play on these arcade machines, they get help from the Nintendo helpline. What the hell is this movie, man? Then they go into a video game competition where the final game is the unreleased Super Mario Bros. 3. And then a bunch of other stuff happens. Funnily enough, this is the first movie that Tobey Maguire appeared in. How? Now, why did Super Mario Bros. 3 show up in this random movie? A chip shortage. Duh. To cut a long story short, in 1988 there was a ROM chip shortage, as well as a shortage of Super Mario Bros. 2 existing in the US, as the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 2 was too hard for Americans. So they found a different game from Nintendo's archives called Doki Doki Panic, which came from a collaboration with Fuji Television as a part of an ongoing relationship that started with the release of All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. And ended with Doki Doki Panic, released for the Famicom Disk System. And then they turned that game into the American version of Super Mario Bros. 2, starring Mario, Luigi, Toad, and Princess Peach. Or as she was known in the US at the time, Princess Toadstool. But that led to there being a delay of Super Mario Bros. 3 because America didn't have Super Mario Bros. 2 yet. And so because they made this other game, Super Mario Bros. 2, it led to a delay of the game, technically, I guess. So we had to wait a little bit longer for Super Mario Bros. 3, but Super Mario Bros. 3 would have probably been delayed anyway, because that's how just games worked in Japan. And you know ROM chip shortages make it harder. They had to delay Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. So because of this delay, Universal Studios, you know, the same company that sued Nintendo a few years earlier, asked Nintendo of America if they could use Nintendo stuff in the movie, with that movie eventually becoming known as The Wizard. The Wizard ended up releasing in December of 1989, setting up the release of Super Mario Bros. 3 in February 1990. And because of that, they actually let another Mario game kind of slip in between, being Super Mario Land, which is just kind of interesting. But of course, The Wizard was not received well. I mean, it was just a big ad for Nintendo. Like, it has its fans, but who wants to sit and watch an ad?
Mario! Mario!
Super Mario Bros. 3 was coming out in the rest of the world, and people were hyped. People actually started importing the Japanese version just so they could play the game early. And some even made bootleg versions of the game just so they could play it on their original NES. Like, my god, people wanted Super Mario Bros. 3 that badly. Promotion was all over the place, promoting this to be the biggest game ever. And you know what? It was. I obviously didn't buy this game when it came out in 1990 or 1991 when it released in PAL regions. But what I did do is buy it for $5 in 2015. Do you want to see it? It's right here. I bought it for $5. I mean, okay, look. This game, of course, went down in gaming as one of the greatest games of all time, only being compared to Super Mario World, the next 2D Mario game that follows this one up, as both games just bring a great adventure to the Mario universe and are just both incredible. The game also got remade in Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo, with that version just having some beautiful graphics and honestly my preferred way to play the game. And then it was brought to the Game Boy Advance as Super Mario Advance 4. But we're here to talk about the original game. Super Mario Bros. 3 is clearly the best Mario game, at least at the time. It doesn't have that much to compare to, though. All the Mario series had were a few arcade titles, the Game & Watch games that first try at bringing Mario into the 2D platformer genre, the harder version of the previous one, the arcade version of the previous one, the PC version of the previous one, and a game that isn't really a Mario game. So what does it have to compete to? Well, I didn't think about that one, did I? Super Mario Bros. 3 just has that sense of exploration that the other games in the series don't have. The game introduces the concept of a world map to the series, sliding, flying powers, and so much more. All of these things you can take advantage of in a modern Mario game all mostly came from Super Mario Bros. 3. It didn't try and do anything completely different like Super Mario Bros. 2 did, it truly took what the original game did, spiced it up with better graphics, and reinvented every single tiny detail about it. It's absolutely brilliant. The game takes up the look of a play, with all of the elements being either attached to the background or very wood-like, giving the game a bit more energy than the previous one. The first level is just iconic, with the coloured square platforms alongside the piranha plant that shoots fireballs at you. It shows that this game is going to be just a little bit different compared to what you're used to on your usual Mario adventure. When you can finally get a power-up that isn't just a mushroom, you're introduced to not a fire flower, but the Tanuki leaf. Holy crap. The Tanuki leaf introduced an entire new way to play the game. In Super Mario Bros. 1 or Lost Levels, you stay on the ground for pretty much the whole game, whereas the Tanuki leaf introduces a whole new dimension to the game that you've never even thought about exploring before. It may sound silly now that a flying power was this revolutionary of a power-up that Mario had never done before, seeing as there's a new power-up that makes you fly in every Mario game that comes out, but the Tanuki leaf was the very first time Mario could fly, and it was incredible. After you beat the second level of the game, you're given a choice. Do you go forward on the world map to play 1-3 and 1-4, or do you skip straight to the castle? If you skip straight to the castle, you not only miss out on the Mushroom House, but also miss out on any secrets that may appear in those two levels. But if you go straight to the castle, you can get through the game quicker. What do you choose? I mean, it's pretty obvious, no? The castle? Wrong. If you go to 1-3, you can get a warp whistle, then skip all the way to World 8, after you also go in the castle. How fun! I mean, unless you want to actually play through the entire game, then that's pretty pointless. Well, okay then, let's continue. You may notice that on this world map, there's actually 2 castles instead of the usual 1 castle. Yeah, that's actually something else this game introduced too. This game is the first Mario game that has more than 1 castle in a world. God, we take this game for granted. But before we get to the castle, we gotta play some games with Toad. Every world has at least one of these games where you can play against Toad to try and get a few 1-ups by matching the picture. It's extremely difficult, but when you do it, you feel just so damn good. But the castle. That's what we're here for. The castle is pretty normal for Mario standards, obviously a few things were introduced, but where it gets interesting is the first boss fight. You get to fight Boom Boom. Really? Boom Boom? Boom Boom may be the most overused Mario villain ever, but Super Mario Bros. 3 was where he was first introduced. Doesn't mean he's any less hard to defeat though, just jump on his head a few times and you're golden. It's such a breath of fresh air not having to fight the same guy over and over again. I mean, after the previous actual Mario game had Bowser 7 times in a row before actually getting to the real deal, it's nice to actually fight a few different enemies. And that brings us to the second castle. See, the plot of this game is to return all the kings of the different kingdoms into their human form as they were transferred into different animals. You're also supposed to ignore the fact that all of these kings kind of just look like Luigi. Now, in order to get these kings back to their former selves, you gotta fight the Koopalings. The Koopalings are the new world bosses, with there being 7 of them that were originally Bowser's kids, but now there aren't, but now they are, but now there aren't, but now they are, and now there aren't. Got it? The castles actually have you go on an airship first, a new type of level, in order to get you to the Koopalings, and each Koopaling has a different way of beating them. Well, I mean, you jump on their heads, but they all do different types of attacks. Not one Koopaling is the same. Once again, these guys got overused in the new Super games, but in this game, they are truly unique compared to what came in the past. And now that you've saved one king, All you need to do is do it 6 more times before you get to the world that you can save Princess Peach. Pretty simple, right? So, you've beaten World 1 of Super Mario Bros. 3. Congratulations! Proud of yourself. Each world may have the same goals, the same premise, the same amount of levels or whatever, but each world is just so damn unique compared to the last. World 2 may be that classic desert Mario level that we see repeated over and over and over again, but this was actually the first real Mario game that had a desert in it. Super Mario Bros. 3 is truly an exciting game compared to the other Mario games in the series. And funnily enough, this game is still revered as one of the best Mario games, or just best video games, of all time. Super Mario Bros. 3 is just great. If we're looking at just the mainline games, Super Mario Bros. 3 is one of the best ones. It's got original concepts, it looks great, a long and exciting journey, every damn thing about this game just works. The giant world is a personal highlight of mine. To change everything up again, Super Mario Bros. 3 has a whole world dedicated to there being huge objects. I'm not one to say making things huge in a game just makes it great, but this is just so much fun. Each Boom Boom fight and each crippling fight are just so fun to do as well. I may not like airship levels, like at all, but Super Mario Bros. 3 truly knows how to make everything interesting. You just need to put yourself in the headspace of, hey, this is the first time this has ever appeared in a Mario game. And then you start to realize how fantastic this game really is. I'll admit, it took me a while to get this game to click for me, but I've been having these types of realizations a lot more often now. For the longest time, I just didn't get Donkey Kong Country, but recently I played the majority of the first game on official hardware and my god, it just clicked. And I think Donkey Kong Country is a great game to compare this to. Both games truly reinvent the 2D platformer genre, using already pre-established characters, creating quite possibly the best 2D platformer in each of their respective franchises, and they just work. Both games have this feel of exploration that the other games just don't have. Granted, with Donkey Kong, his previous games aren't that complicated to figure out, but both Super Mario Bros. 3 and Donkey Kong Country feel like the next step for both of them. However, if I had to say anything bad about Super Mario Bros. 3. Look, I love Super Mario Bros. 3 just as much as the next guy, but the World 7 first castle is just absolutely terrible. I've never disliked something as much as I have that, and the same with the World 8 castle. Both are just confusing puzzles, and I just don't get them. How are you able to beat them if you don't have Google? Back in the day, you would have had to have owned a strategy guide to beat these levels, or call the Nintendo helpline. You know, from the wizard. Hello?
Hey, how on God's green earth do you beat the World 7 castle in Super Mario Bros. 3? It's impossible.
Oh, for God's sakes, man. And I'm sorry, but the level that follows World 7 Castle is even worse. I think I would have never been able to actually complete this level if I didn't have the Tanuki tail. Like, how is that even possible? These problems happen in more than just these levels, and they annoy me when I'm trying to just casually play through the game. It's fine to have puzzles in games, but ones that you have absolutely no clue how to beat just throw me off so much, man. My final complaint is the third World 8 airship/tank level. The auto-scroll is just way too fast. It took me way too many tries to actually beat this level. Other than that, this game is fantastic. This game is truly a master in its craftsmanship, and truly is the best 2D Mario game. If only they didn't make the perfect Mario game right afterwards. God, I love you.